My story begins in Durham. I think I want to talk to you a little bit about why I decided to run for office. So this won't be a campaign speech, just much more about why I thought it was important for me to run and help make the community that I love better. So I was born here, born in Durham. I always say I'm a fourth-generation Durhamite. My great-grandfather moved to Durham just one generation removed from slavery. After emancipation, he heard about this place called Durham where economic opportunity existed for black folks in a way that didn't exist in other places in the South. So at 15 or 14, he decided to move here and look for a job. And he found work at the McPherson Hospital, which is now a Residence Inn on Main Street, if you know where that Residence Inn is. And so my family's been here ever since on my father's side. My mother is from Germany. My mother was born in East Germany, and at 5 years old, she escaped right before the completion of the Berlin Wall and grew up the next 3 years of her life in a refugee camp. So two very different sort of starts for my family, but equally tied to the sort of concept of overcoming some really dire circumstances, right? My father's side of the family sort of overcoming atrocities of 400 years worth of chattel slavery. My mother escaping an oppressive regime in East Germany and literally growing up with nothing for the most of her life. And she tells a story that my grandmother, her mom, found a job in the refugee camp that paid $1 a day, which was more money better than nothing, I suppose. And she peeled potatoes for a potato farmer. She would peel the potatoes, but $1 a day wasn't quite enough to always feed the family, so she would also steal potatoes, and she and my mom would eat raw potatoes like apples. So, just think about kind of that as a humble beginning, right? Like that is, I get super emotional just thinking about that. Because I have kids of my own, and I can't imagine what it must be like to, raise a child in that environment. But nonetheless, my parents met in the military. My father was in the Air Force, and my dad lived in Germany for 15 years. They ended up coming back to Durham, his hometown, in the 80s, right before I was born. So I'm the first of my father's 7 children to be born here in Durham, so back where it all started, essentially. So born and raised here with a deep and rich appreciation for the community. I was raised to believe that Durham was the greatest city in the world. My dad spent all of his time in the military bragging about his hometown, and he's had the chance to live in so many cool places and much bigger metropolitan areas. But he was, if you think I love Durham, you meet my dad, you'll realize that there is a bigger cheerleader for Durham than me, and it's him. So, in my house, there was this constant reminder that Durham was a special place, and we were fortunate to be here, and, our ancestors, sort of helped build this place, and we belonged here, and there was no better place to be but Durham. And it kind of worked a little bit until I got to high school, and all my friends were like, man, I can't wait to get out of this place. What about you? And if is anybody from Durham in here? Okay, a few folks. So if you were here in the 90s, you remember Durham was a different place. It was a little slower, much smaller, and really felt like a place on the downswing, right? Felt like it was a place that was sort of dying. Industry had left in the 80s, tobacco was gone. There was a mall at South Square, a mall at Northgate, and some jobs at Duke, and that was really about it, right? Came downtown to pay the water bill, and maybe if you were late on the power bill, you also had to come downtown to pay that, which we were frequently late on all of our bills growing up. So that's the only time I saw downtown, and still remember the smell of tobacco as a kid, and that would be cool if we could bring that back. It was one of my favorite parts about coming to pay the water bill was smelling the smell of tobacco. But nonetheless, Durham felt like a dying place when I was a kid, and I decided to leave. I went to North Carolina A&T for college, and immediately had an experience that was similar to my dad's. There's nothing like leaving your hometown to sort of make you proud of your hometown again, right? It was like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Durham. Where's that? You know what I mean? Or, wow, Durham, I heard that place was dangerous, or I heard it was dirty, or I heard it was, good thing you're not there anymore. And it gives you this sort of chip on your shoulder, and it sort of reignited my pride for the city. At the same time, I was making music. I've been making music since I was 7 years old. I'm a hip hop artist. I had the chance to tour the world. I performed in 15 international countries, done television, I've scored movies, I've starred in movies, I've done all these amazing things that also sort of embolden this pride in our city, because you're in front of a room full of people and you're talking about where you come from and your experiences. And it just sort of all that combined into me becoming this, I guess, cheerleader for the city of Durham. And so I went to A&T, represented the city, and loved my city so much, but apparently didn't love it enough to come back right away, because I continued to pursue my career, and I lived in Philly and LA and spent some time in New York until my father got sick. So my dad had a stroke in 2009, had prostate cancer right around the same time. My dad is a diabetic, he has heart disease, he has sort of, you know, in a, I guess, a dark humor sort of way, if you play Black Health Crisis Bingo, my dad checks a lot of the squares. And, you know, gradually his health was getting worse, and I was out sort of chasing my dreams and realized that maybe my dad won't make it much longer, and I really wanted that sense of community and also to be close to my parents and my family, just in case, you know, as she mentioned, time is a privilege. Time is and we don't know how much time we have left. So I moved back to Durham and immediately noticed that our community had changed. And my first impression of this changed community was positive. So remind you, I sort of spent time in these bigger cities on the East Coast and really took a liking to like urban living, which wasn't a part of my childhood here. There wasn't any residential property downtown when I was a child. So I came back and it was like, oh shoot, we got a downtown now, and there's places to live, and there's bars and restaurants and all the things that I loved about sort of the bigger cities right here in my hometown. So I was like, this is cool. So I decided to move downtown. I got me a place on Main Street and really wanted to immerse myself in the new Durham. And at first I thought it was really cool. I spent, you know, I go to Alley 26 or the Whiskey or the, you know, a cool live music venue, like Casbah was still here, I think, and Motorcoat was just opening. I was like, damn, we have all the things I want as a young, single person in a downtown. But as I looked a little deeper, I noticed that folks that I remembered from growing up were not here anymore. Folks that have been here for generations were not present in downtown. And it started to feel very much like a shell of its former self. And what I loved about Durham growing up, remember there wasn't a lot of things, there weren't a lot of buildings or places to go, but the people were so amazing. And the summer camps I would go to, and the programs I would spend time in, and the elders that I would talk to, and just this amazing community of people, the resiliency of the people. And those people were gone. I couldn't find them. And I was like, man, this community is changed in ways that I don't like also. And so I leaned in a little bit to what I'll call community organizing work, which I use loosely because I have a great deal of respect for what real organizers do. But our organizing was specifically around the lack of people of color, particularly black folks, in a city with such a rich black history in our downtown core. Because before I left, there were black folks everywhere. And now there aren't. And so I'm like, man, what can we do? So we started this movement called Black August in the Park, which is a festival. We're on our 5th year of this festival, but it really started as a way for us to just make space for black people in downtown, right? A space where we could remember that we still have a community that's 50% black, and a community that has an amazing, rich black history. And so Black August in the Park was born out of that work. And so doing that work, I was like, okay, so I'm going to lean into this social justice space and sort of figure out what I can do to sort of reclaim the city that I loved before I left. And that city, to me, represented a place where all voices were valued, where our history and our legacy mattered, and where we were able to move forward together, right? And so we did that work, and then I started to notice another troubling trend, and some would call it gentrification, some would call it a lack of affordability, some would call it economic inequality. It became a little bit drastic to me in meeting with families and folks that through Black August that I didn't even know growing up, but have been here for generations and are like, man, yeah, you know, I'm having to move out of my neighborhood. I'm moving to Granville County or Alamance County or Orange County, and because I can't afford to stay here. And that also bothered me. So I started to lean into economic development work. How does that work? How are communities developed? And sort of serendipitously, I suppose, and sort of me studying that work, I got a call for a job, and I'll spare you the story of the interview process, but I took a job at the Chamber of Commerce doing economic development work for the city. And my Black August in the Park friends and organizing folks are like, why are you working at the Chamber, man? That's like the antithesis of everything that we stand for, right? And my thought was, I need to get on the inside of this thing and figure out how we can make a city that's growing grow in an equitable fashion and in a way that doesn't displace folks and in a way that creates opportunities to help us close the income inequality gap. So I've been doing that work for 3 years, and being surrounded sort of adjacent to political movements. At the Chamber, we are a non-political organization, but we work with politicians often. And would sit in spaces and rooms and hear this data about Durham that confirmed many of the things that I'd identified since I returned, but that was also really alarming. So one of the biggest data points that was sort of thrown out casually at a meeting with the mayor was that 20% of our residents live in poverty. In sort of support of that, we have one of the highest poverty rates in all of North Carolina, and that really was like, damn. But it was sort of just thrown out casually, and we sort of moved on, and we started talking about affordable housing or transit or whatever the issue of the day was. And that just really didn't sit well with me. It really bothered me that 20% of people, which actually equates to almost 60,000 folks, I guess a little over 50,000 people. That's a lot of people. That's bigger than most cities in the United States, and 50,000 plus folks in our community are in poverty. So I started to wonder, what are we doing about it, right? What are we doing about poverty in Durham? And I couldn't get any answers. I heard things like, we're gonna focus on affordable housing, which is important, but affordable housing initiatives, absent of a real economic strategy to create opportunities, traditionally serve people who are already not in poverty, right? An affordable housing plan mostly serves people who are already working, right? People who already can afford something. It does very little to help lift people out of poverty. So I leaned in a little bit and asked some really difficult questions and couldn't get the answers that I wanted or needed. And I'll juxtapose that against the work that I was doing at the Chamber, which was creating jobs. My job at the Chamber is to work with businesses to either bring them here or help them expand, which then in turn creates jobs for people in Durham. And the biggest hurdle for me to do that work was our city council. And I would say, hey, this company wants to come to Durham. They want to bring 400 jobs. They want to pay for the training. The jobs pay more than a living wage. They're fully benefited jobs. And this is if you want to talk about what pushed me over the edge, it was this response. Yeah, but those jobs aren't for Durham folks. So as a Durham folk, right, someone who's born and raised here and really proud to be from here, I would say, well, what the hell does that mean? What is a Durham folk? What is a job for Durham folks? And if you sort of lift up the hood and look deeper into what that means, it means these aren't jobs for black folks. These are IT jobs, these are engineering jobs, these are software development jobs. These ain't jobs for those folks. And most of the people saying that are people with those jobs, right? People that are professors at Duke or lawyers or engineers. Yeah, but we don't need those jobs. Those aren't jobs for Durham folks. Let's talk about some service jobs, or let's talk about some coffee shop jobs, or shout out to Justin, or let's talk about some hotel jobs, which are great jobs, right? But we know that a pathway out of poverty is difficult. It's difficult to create a pathway out of poverty even with a $15 an hour job, right? If it's because $15 an hour juxtaposed against generations of debt, it's still really challenging to lift yourself up. And I'm talking to folks about $72,000 a year jobs or $80,000 a year jobs. So that statement really made me think about running for office. I was like, you know what? First step, I'm going to meet with everybody on council and sort of get their pulse. And got varying reactions, right? We don't have time to talk about all 7 of the conversations, but what I noticed was noticeably absent from those conversations was a perspective that was tied to the history and legacy of Durham, and this belief that we can do better. We can do better than 50,000 people in poverty. That is the crux of my message. The belief that it is possible to lift people out of poverty. It is possible to make our communities safe. I think economics and safety are directly tied to one another. I think when people have the ability to meet their basic needs, we're all safer. So I had 7 of those conversations and couldn't get the answer that I wanted, couldn't get the answer that I was looking for, and I couldn't find a person that represented the perspective of the thousands and thousands of folks that I grew up with and that have been here for a long time. Now, I want to be clear about something, because most of y'all moved here and we're happy that you're here, right? I'm really happy that Durham is a welcoming place and that you found a home here. And I would never say that just because you're not from here, that this ain't your home, because we're happy to have you. But what I will say is if this place can be a home for you and for all of us who are doing well, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that it's a home for those who are not benefiting from what's happening right now and who are not standing up here looking at this beautiful view or driving in a nice car, living in a nice place. And that's why I'm running for office, because I believe that better is possible. I don't think this is as good as it gets. I know compared to the 90s that this is amazing. It's amazing to have a 27-story tower and, you know, DPAC is here and we have a new stadium. But when I was a kid and I was wanting to play basketball, I came home one day from work, and this is going to make my dad sound like a really hard dad. He was not. But I came home from basketball and I scored 13 points, and I felt like I was the man. I was like, Dad, I scored 13 tonight. It was like 8th grade. I scored 13 tonight. I had maybe like 5 assists, and I'm not the most athletic guy. You could probably look at me and guess that. But it felt really good for me. I was like, man, I killed it. And so my dad's like, you're going to get up in the morning and go get your shots in the backyard. I used to get up in the morning and go shoot on my backyard basketball goal. I was like, nah, I think I'm going to take the day off, man. I'm feeling like the man. I'm just going to play NBA Live and just, you know, reminisce about the shots. And he said, so you think that's good enough? And he said, as one of his favorite quotes, he said, good is never good enough if better is possible. And if you follow me, if you've seen the videos that Rain made for me, that's the mantra of my campaign, that I believe that better is possible. And I think that we have to do better for future generations and for the now. We can do better than 50,000 people in poverty. We can do better than a 20% rise in violent crime. We can do better than a city that has essentially stated that people can't lift themselves up out of poverty, so we have to give them something and give them a Band-Aid. To me, that's defeatist and that's paternalistic, and it bothers me deeply as a Durham person, the belief that we can't do better and help others do better. So now you know where I come from, now you know why I'm running. I really hope that you all will also believe that we can do better, and whatever that means. Doesn't mean just voting, it doesn't mean just saying it or typing it or hashtagging it, but I implore you to think about how we can do better for the 50,000 plus people and families that are struggling to meet their basic needs in our city. I truly believe that better is possible, and I thank y'all for the time and the energy and hope we can do this together. Thank y'all.